Okay, so hello everybody again. We will be presenting the Belgian Deaf and Hearing Interpreter collaboration during COVID-19. I'm sorry to say we are not proficient enough in international signs, so we will be speaking English, and Delphine and Carolien will be signing international. So there we go. So there's 4 of us here today, but of course we are a much bigger team of interpreters in Belgium, deaf and hearing interpreters. As you can see on the slide here, there's 8 interpreters from Flanders and 9 interpreters from Wallonia.
Okay, sorry for interrupting. May I ask you to speak up a little bit? People are complaining that they cannot hear you properly. Thank you.
Okay. So we will be talking about our experience during the Corona press conferences, the interpretation of the Corona press conferences in Belgium, and it was a deaf hearing interpreter team collaboration. First of all, we will show you a bit about the situation in Belgium. So Belgium is quite a complex federal country. We have 3 regions, 3 communities. So the Flemish region, as you can see on the slide, the Brussels capital region, and the Walloon region. And then we also have 3 language communities who overlap a little bit, but are somewhat different also. So there's the Flemish community, which is Dutch speaking, the French community that speaks French, and the German speaking community, that's very small, as you can see on the slide. So there are 3 official languages, Dutch, French, and German. And in every language community, there is a symbolic recognition of the sign languages in these communities. So in Flanders, we have the Flemish Sign Language, which is called VGT, the French-Belgian Sign Language in the French community, which is called LSFB, and then the German Sign Language in the German-speaking community, which is called DGS. Some numbers to give you. So in Belgium, there is estimated that there are 30,000 to 50,000 people using sign language. 12 to 22,000 in Brussels, Wallonia using LSFB, and 6 to 13,000 people using VGT. For the interpreters, Wallonia has about 30, which is quite a small number. Although we are a small country, of course. 30 interpreters with various degrees, and in Flanders there are 140 interpreters, although more than 70% of them have another main occupation, so they don't work full time. So that's it for the numbers.
So hello, now I'm gonna speak a little bit on how the project started. So I hope you hear me well. I'm going to try to keep the voice up. So first in 2016, when the terrorist attack appears in Brussels, the state didn't give accessibility in sign language in their communication. So from there, the 2 deaf federations, the DOEF Vlaanderen and the FFSB, started to lobby to the crisis center to have accessibility during crisis time. They asked for the communication to be made by them themselves when addressed to the deaf community and other stuff, which led after years of lobbying from the crisis center to search for sign language interpreters for their daily briefing. So they contacted us first, hearing interpreters in both Flanders and Brussels Wallonia region. And after the initial talk with them, we decided to contact our deaf interpreters colleagues to see if they would be up for it, as it would be on media and all. And we rapidly constructed an argumentation, which was primarily based on the article of Marc de Mulder and Isabelle Eyrick, which is a research about deaf interpreter on television in Flanders. But it also gave you 9 different arguments about why it should happen, which is like a full of different research about the topic. So we use most of them, but for today, we're just gonna show you 2 of them, which is very interesting if you have to do it one day. First of all, the cultural dimension. So deaf interpreters are cultural insiders, which means they have the ability to think as other deaf people think. So they would present, as Stone said in 2009, like a perspective from learning the world by viewing the world, or conceptualization of information by visual and seeing. So, and then the linguistic dimension. So they would give what we could call an inside perspective on the concept and the ideas we were translating. So they will construct the action or the dialogue as they would be a part of it. So after we did that, we were simultaneously in contact with our Flemish colleague, and we had the same idea of doing co-interpretation. So we explained all the arguments to the state, and they decided, because also we got the support from the 2 deaf federation, they decided to trust us and ask us to build 2 teams, one for PGT and one for LSF. So we would like to thank the Crisis Centrum for the trust, which was renewed many times. As for the beginning, it was supposed to be 2 weeks. It turned out to be almost a year and a half and 200 press conferences now, and still going. And we were smaller teams in the beginning, but as you know, there were a 2nd wave and a 3rd wave, and it was a lot of daily briefing. In the beginning, it was 6 days a week, then 4, then 3, then it varies depending on the number. So we had new colleagues on the team. And one of the important things to say about it is then we are not all certified. So we have different training. Some of us have a vocational degree, others have a master degree in sign language interpreting, others doesn't have a degree in interpretation, but this doesn't stop us to becoming an effective team and from the states to trust us. So now Elke will explain a little bit how it works.
So we use the term co-interpretation since we are a country with many different languages, French speaking, Dutch speaking, LSFB, VGT. We used all different kinds of terms to name what we were doing, but we decided to go with the term co-interpretation. It has been called other names from different perspective and different research, but to be clear, we use co-interpretation. And this is a practice presented here. So it is a specific simultaneous interpreting process between a hearing and a deaf interpreter. So the hearing interpreter, as you can see on the slide, is the one on the left, bottom left, interprets the source discourse, which is in French, to French-Belgian Sign Language, LSFB, or from Dutch into PGT. And is relaying it to the deaf interpreter, who is here on the right side of the picture, on the bottom right side, who reformulates the message and relays the discourse to the deaf audience. This is what it looks like when it's being streamed on TV or on the internet. So the right side picture is a hearing interpreter, so we put it next to it, so you can see how it looks on TV without, of course, the hearing interpreter. So this process can also be referred to as an interlingual interpretation. So the reformulation by a deaf interpreter who has native or near native fluency in LSFB or VGT differs from the production of a direct interpretation from the hearing interpreters who only have most of the time LSFB or VGT as a second language. So they master the subtleties of the language among other skills, obviously. So this practice aims for interpreting into a language that is as natural as possible for the deaf signing community. So to facilitate as well as possible their comprehensibility. So before we finish, we will share with you some things that we have learned or that we have experienced. And we added some pictures to show you a bit how it went. So what's the most important part is that you need a very deep trust between the team. You need to trust that your colleague is going to get the message, and you cannot constantly monitor what the colleague is doing because you lose too much energy and information if you do it. So it's important to build on this trust, and after time it goes more fluent and more effortlessly. What also for us hearing interpreters was very enriching is that we worked with the deaf interpreters. It hasn't happened that much before for us. So it was a very rich and experience. For example, preparing the vocabularies, a specific scientific vocabulary, specific phrases, name signs. So there was a lot of, how do we say this word? Exchange. Thank you. Between all the members of the team. And also what was important was the role of the support interpreter. As you can see on the slide on the top left, there's someone standing behind the first active and hearing interpreter who points to the numbers, who gives extra information, who gives the tempo of the speaker, of the discourse, which is quite important for switching, because we switched between speaking Dutch and speaking French, and sometimes the speakers are switching quite fast. So it's the task of the support interpreter to give like the tempo and say like it's time to finish and to switch the deaf interpreters, because on top is the deaf interpreter from Flanders and on the bottom is the deaf interpreter from Wallonia. So they also have to switch during the press conferences. It was not like have a little pause, okay, you have time to switch and then go on. No, it was like very fast switching. So that was also a task of the support interpreter.
Also, what we learned from our experience is that it really differs from a direct interpretation when you are doing it alone. And it differs in many ways. We were lucky because it was for months, 6 days a week. So we were experimenting a lot and giving a lot of feedback to each other. So we had to develop something we can call like a smaller interpretation for the feeding parts, which allowed the deaf interpreter to maybe add information, clarify information, and so on. And also a smaller interpretation doesn't mean you like erase a lot of information. It means, for example, you do less constricted action, you do less repetition, that kind of things. And so you leave room for the deaf interpreter to do the personal transfer themselves, which will show an inside perspective. And it was what were looking for. And also for the cultural transfer, as it is, for example, in French, we use a lot of metaphors. And specifically in a daily briefing for the whole population about scientific concepts, they use a lot of metaphors. So that's something you can either prepare in advance when you know it, or something you can build from the experience with your deaf colleagues to either take the metaphor as it is, like, you know, we are climbing a mountain because it's hard and that kind of stuff, or either just taking the meaning of the metaphor and like transforming it to be more natural in sign language. So to conclude the first part of this presentation before Delphine and Carolien tell their part of it, we would like to had some hearing perspective conclusion about what we did. And as it turned out, one decision can change it all. As for many reasons, it was not possible for deaf interpreter to be in the media for crisis official communication before Corona. And so they were not the ones to be contacted for the job. So we were. And as hearing interpreters, it shows the power we have and we possess. So we are facing, every time we were asking some, like a mission, we need to think about who would be the best. And this one was an important choice to make. So fundamentally necessary, we need to be aware of the privilege we have and question it, and how much our decision can make us allies or not. So it's not about saving anybody by like taking the deaf and doing something, or nor considering yourself as an incompetent interpreter. It's just about being fair. So thank you.
And now I think if the host will please spotlight Carolien and Delphine, because they will sign. And we will, I put out my video, but we will still be sharing my screen. Thank you.
Sorry, we need voice interpretation. I'm sorry, can we please stop for a minute? Sorry, we don't have interpreters.
Thank you. We are working from a deaf association. We have a lot of hearing interpreters, and we as deaf people need interpreters for work deaf interpreters to use interpreters more regularly. So we have approximately
Is it okay with the interpreters?
Yes, we are ready. Thank you. Can I continue? Can I continue? Okay, thank you. I explained it was explained from a deaf person's perspective and a hearing interpreter's perspective. So how we work as in the interpreting sector, we've got two groups. We've got LSF interpreters and then VGT interpreters, and I will explain more on these two groups. Since 2000, we had hearing interpreters that we have met, and in the psychological environment, psychiatric settings, we have interpreters that interpreters with, and then we work with deaf interpreters as well. So some deaf interpreters did not understand then the written language. So then in 2009, in the conference interpreting situations in LSFB, we had other sign languages like American Sign Language and International Signs, and then also VGT. So that then increased then how we can then train ourselves and then also to build in this environment. So we had a university that accepted that we have then a one-year training where interpreters can then learn, and then also in different language, spoken and English languages. And so we were very eager to be part of this. And then also now we have court interpreters and conference interpreters that have been trained, that have been also been certified, and also 4 deaf interpreters. So, but just for interpreters, we just need to make sure that we can have more deaf interpreters in future in Belgium. So I focus then on VGT, and then Delphine already explained that, but I have a similar explanation on that. In 2006, when Belgium accepted and government accepted, but before, what happened to us in Belgium, before us, we had the recognition of VGT and working with VGT and other sign languages. And since that recognition with VGT in 2006, the growing demand of the translations of Dutch in VGT. In 2010, we had a short course of 8 presenters and translators. We had then to make sure that we have then also more accessible for deaf people, have then access to the printed form, and then also how to work then from captions and so forth, and that we can then have workshops to train the 8 deaf interpreters how to work from captions and then interpret then from there. So from these 8, what was selected then is also now interpreting as well. And then in 2012, we had the VGT interpreters on TV with deaf interpreters working with AutoCue. And that is then one person is then also certified, then focusing on interpreting her interpreting MA degree. So that is still continuing. And then after that, we had then approximately 17 frequently active interpreters, and then also then there's unpaid, some are unpaid, and that's very sad. But they are learning, but there's not a lot of opportunities for them, and it's very difficult then for them to get also opportunities. So can I have the next slide, please? In this last year and a half, the world was affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first wave, there were 2 or 6 certified deaf interpreters. And that because we had an opportunity, because we had deaf interpreters that would be able, because of this, we did, people didn't know how do they need to use masks. They didn't have information. There was information barriers, so that we have the center that we can then share information to inform people on the COVID regulations and information to make sure that they contact interpreters. And then also we had 2 hearing interpreters then came to us, and that we as the 2 deaf qualified interpreters then had set up a team of 16, but there were 4 deaf interpreters that know they had some kind of experience and what to do. So at this center, we accepted them, the 16 interpreters that we work with, and to see how we can work together. So in the first wave, we had the COVID, and then there was the second wave that this 16 had been working very hard. So we decided to employ more interpreters. So Delphine and myself have been working together to see how we can increase the interpreters and to train more interpreters. So we realized that with all of the support we received, can I have then that with the addition of the third wave, we really had a lot of work that still had to be done. So how do we work? So Delphine will explain to us. So in the different weeks, we have COVID informations, challenges experienced, vaccination. So we also then, after government have made announcements, so we do it parallel with government to make sure that we work together with them. So we had then the team of deaf interpreters working together with the hearing interpreters from VGT, just to make, then we plan, we work on a script, we go through the script, and then we do it always in advance that we can work with the interpreters to see what is their problems, how we can then come up with a strategy then to make sure that this is then the final script. And then we go into a room where we, in a conference room, where we set up, make sure that the information is on a poster slide, and then we also see where the hearing interpreter then listens to the information, and then there's another person that makes sure that the deaf interpreter does not omit any information. Then after this, we then give feedback to make sure that was this a good program, or how are we going to change this? Was this a good effort? So we always make some adjustments to see how we're going to change this. And so if we can get feedback from people that all deaf associations and leaders then give us feedback, and then we make the necessary adjustments. So we frequently do then feedback as well, and then we change our work. Next slide, please. This is then our experience and what we are doing. It's very important that eye contact needs to be maintained. Before this, when I came to the center, I worked with deaf and hearing interpreters, and when we had people, you had, your eye gaze was wide, and you had peripheral vision, and you would be able to connect to your audience. But in this situation, it was completely different. I was not able to connect with the audience. I know there's trust in the team, but where's my audience? Because I'm looking into a camera. I don't know how to use my processing time correctly. I know that when the speaker is talking too fast, do I omit information? So I just needed to make sure that I can then have an interpreter that can follow me and monitor me, so that I do interpret the information correctly. When there's new information, when it's not on the script, when new information do come up, when people ask us questions, we need to, maybe there's new information coming up, maybe there's new names or numbers and so forth. So we make sure that we then have the correct eye gaze, that it's also not picked up by the camera and the people looking into the camera. So that your memory skills is extremely important, because the script help you to memorize the things, you visualize how you're going to place work in your interpreting space. And then also sometimes at the last minute, when they ask us to go interpret 10 minutes or 20 minutes before we have to rush through the script, make sure that we understand the content, and then ask us to interpret. But then I need to rely on my own memory, and it's very difficult then for me to rely on my memory because of the 11th hour that people ask us to interpret. So then I rely on my support interpreter then to feed me with the necessary information. So it's our responsibility to read, prepare, look at the television where people then give you feedback. It's important that we, with COVID, all this information, so you need to internalize all that information, and then you'll be able to interpret that. So over to you, Delphine. With deaf interpreters, I worked with deaf interpreters, and from time to time we work with what we get from the hearing interpreters. We work with our processing time. Sometimes at the last minute, when people are adding PowerPoints or they're adding information, and it's new information going forward. So the information is different, especially with graphs, numbers, and these pictures. So then you don't have a long processing time. You need to shorten your processing time, make sure that you are on par with the information, to make sure that you do not omit any information. So we make sure that our processing time when we process information is much shorter, so that we then make sure that we're able to pace ourselves and then also to manage the information, what we interpret. So many times it's this same content, the same signs for vaccination, COVID. So we know what information will come forward from the interpret, so we can predict more, and that we know that the topics, there's different stories, but we get people. So we establish that because we are used to that kind of information. So people, when people are presenting, we know that what they will say, and sometimes we can make a mistake when we predict, make wrong predictions. So we must constantly be in feel with the information, so that sometimes our processing time is shorter, sometimes it's longer if the information is familiar to us. So we need to make sure that we stay on par with the information. Next slide, please. Our second conclusion, over to you, Caroline. We, like I said in our conclusion, so if there was no COVID-19, will we would ever have this opportunity as deaf interpreters and hearing interpreters? Maybe there will be the odd interpreters that have been trained, but COVID has given us an opportunity and an experience to develop interpreters to make sure that deaf interpreters are on the same level as hearing interpreters. As a deaf interpreter, I receive then information, get enough time to prepare, to do some research, to work on my structure, especially with sign language. And then also for me, doing all that preparation, it improves me as an interpreter. And when I started with this, I really couldn't connect with hearing interpreters. Now it's so easy, and I'm so comfortable working with the hearing interpreters. I know in the beginning I was extremely nervous. Now I'm so used to this, and it's very familiar to me. So when a person asks me a question, or maybe with eye contact, they said that there was not enough eye contact. So that feedback was then received, and I tried to improve my interpretation, so that we come up with different strategies, and we constantly change the way we have interpreted, because we work with with the different languages. So from the Dutch and the French, and with the both languages, there's signs that differ, so that we need to make sure. Sometimes people like that, the sign that we used, and sometimes we use that sign. So, and there's constant exchange of signs that has been used. And during COVID, there's different variants, and then also, we also then use for the vaccinations, there are different signs. And so we come up with sign names for these and the variants, so that we're happy with what we've done as a team. We as a team consult, we open up for, we consult also with the communities, so for us to make sure that we interpret all the information correctly. Next slide. Thank you. It's very important for us that for the four of us, what we overall, our conclusion is from a team perspective, is that I know that in the beginning we didn't know what to do, how, the streets were empty, we couldn't go to the shops. And so we as interpreters, when we came together, when we met hearing interpreters, we were very scared. And now that we are familiar with the situation, we really take us to another world. And that made us feel safe. We then, as interpreters, then work together to, as co-interpreters, really, we now just as experienced as our hearing interpreters, where they are experts in English and so forth, and in the different languages. So what we've learned from the hearing interpreters was phenomenal. And, you know, we grew up in deaf culture and so forth. What the interpreters, the hearing interpreters then learned from us, that was such a rich environment for us to learn from each other. So we've learned to trust one another. We've learned to work with one another and form connections when we work not only on COVID-related matters, but in other situations where there's opportunities where we can work with our hearing interpreters as co-interpreters in theatre and so forth, so that we know what we trust our hearing interpreters, so that we can work with them. So, although through COVID, it has a huge impact, and everybody looked at the interpreters. So it's important that we show that there is a working relationship and a trust relationship between deaf and hearing interpreters, so that we can show it to the world. So next slide, please. Caroline, so the problem we need to make sure that we look forward and make sure that more interpreters are trained. We are really extremely ecstatic because of funding that has been allocated to us, that we can then provide training. So we know, because the people that have been in this team, we never had funding for the training. So people that are those who are not qualified then will be going for training, and so that we can open opportunities. We know that for a period of time, we will definitely have the courses will start then for the training, and to make sure that we can work together, that people feel that why deaf interpreters are needed. We will show them, we will have the necessary material to show them that, and also an association in how we work as interpreters at university level, and then also in Deaf Association. We're very happy that we had the support, and we really have definitely made some strides in the interpreting field in Belgium. So we also need to make sure that we as hearing interpreters and deaf interpreters then also work together in a team. Will you be able to train together? Because there's different situations where we have deaf interpreting, hearing interpreters can train together, and then some situations they can't. So we need to make sure that in November, we will then start with the training, and we will definitely share that information. And then after the training, we will have then qualified interpreters for television, theatre, conferencing interpreters, interpreting songs. So we will definitely expand our interpreters. And I forgot to add, and then in February, after they've completed their studies, then we will have hearing interpreters that know their code of ethics, that it's also been recognized by government, because government is recognizing hearing interpreters in their code of ethics. Now government just need to recognize after they've deaf interpreters been trained recognized by government. So thank you. And I really want to say thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the different associations that also been working with us wisely, and then for their support and all the traveling that has been done for the deaf associations, for your, I know in government, for your support in this. And thank you, and especially for the funding that's been allocated to us. Thank you for viewing my presentation. And I think that's everything. Can we have then the next slide, please? We have references. If you want that information, you can click on those links, and you can also see on our website, there's more information for you to look at, and then also where you're going to work and how you plan to work with an interpreter. It's very interesting. So it's there for you to read. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Team Belgium. I believe you are through with the presentation. Okay, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Personally, I've benefited on the
Obed,
part.
please. Obed,
Yes?
sorry, we need the IS interpretation.
Okay, so I hold on. I may proceed.
Yes.
Okay, so I was just congratulating our colleagues for the wonderful presentation on working with the deaf interpreters. It is still a new phenomenon, especially in Africa. You know, people don't see interpreters, hearing interpreters don't see sense in working with a deaf interpreter. If I'm an interpreter, I'm hearing, why don't I just interpret directly with a deaf audience? Why do I need a deaf interpreter? So that was very educative and informative. Thank you so much. I will now check in the chat box if there are any questions. I expect a lot of questions. If I wasn't moderating, I would have a ton of questions, but I'll allow others to ask questions. So I think the first question that I can see is from Johnny Waisaman. I hope that's the first question. It says, what an interesting presentation. I enjoyed it. Delphine and Carolien, how many seconds of translation delay have you been able to build into co-interpretation? And what is the acceptable maximum amount of seconds? So maybe the team can tackle that question and before we move to the next question.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's a very good question. So I read the question. Thank you. Maybe I need to present the question. I'm confused. Maybe can I use international sign interpretation? Or okay, sorry. Maybe Delphine, you can add to whatever my question to my response. So when we, first of all, we look at it and with the first wave and the second wave, but with the second wave, with the first wave, our lag time was really longer and our processing time was longer. So because if we knew the topic, then our processing time was longer. But if we didn't know the topic, our processing time was much more shorter. So I could say maybe 1 or 2 seconds. That was maybe with new information, it was much more, it was shorter. So if the information was fast, then it made processing time was a bit longer. So we adapt constantly in different settings. So when information, if information is omitted or then we make sure that because of the feeder is there to support and monitor the information. So if I forget information or it's dropped, then there's another interpreter that feeds that information to make sure that I do not drop information so that the interpretation is accurately done. So I think Delphine have covered it. So what I know, your feeder is very important, and that also helps you to manage your processing time. So with because we can't hear the information, so we depend on the feeder, and that because if our processing time is not that long, so that we then lose the information. Is there any other questions?
Yes, there are a lot of questions. Thank you so much for tackling that question. Thank you so much for tackling that question. The next question is from Costa Rica, from Adrian Rios. It says, so enlightening. Thank you very much. I have a question. How did you achieve the government to hire the team of interpreters? In other words, I think it's trying to ask, how did you manage to convince the government to hire a team of sign language interpreters? Because in my home country, Costa Rica, institutions often refuse to hire deaf and hearing interpreter teams because they do not understand yet the importance of that kind of work. So they don't understand the team of hearing and deaf interpretation. So how do you manage to convince the government to hire a team of hearing and deaf interpreters?
Nicolas?
Yes, so I guess I'm going to try to give some part of the answer because it's a long thing. So it's a lot of little things, actually. As we said, it's the federation that lobbied beforehand. So it's important because I guess if they were not doing it, it would be much difficult. Then it's when we are supporting it too, because if we don't say that's what we want, it's more difficult, I guess, because if someone comes and say, okay, I will do it by myself and it's going to be cheaper, maybe it's going to be hard to do. Also, you have to build an argumentation. So like we said, we give an article, but there is a lot of research from Christopher Stone, from Boudreau in America. There is a lot of arguments that you can say to convince. But then I think we were lucky because for this crisis, they really wanted to develop what they called universal accessibility, which would take in consideration blind people, stranger people, refugee people, a lot of different need in communication. But this daily briefings, they really wanted to touch every citizen of Belgium. So as we said, that's because there is a lot of different deaf people and different sign language in Belgium, and they would need the most natural sign language that could happen. And we really believed that it could be the way of doing it. So little piece of answer, but I guess, yeah, if you have good arguments and continue to explain and being consistent and supporting the same, I think that can happen, yes. Voilà. So for the rest, I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything or.
Thank you, Nicolas. I think you've explained this well. What I would, from Delphine's side, what I would like to explain, I know that Belgium is very lucky because we receive the necessary support, and especially with deaf interpreters and LSFM, and then also they asked if people were happy, do we need, they did some research, and then what we've done is that we will definitely also publish our article, how people have perceived our services. And then also last week, we also saw on the internet, and there was a publication as well, and then you can also see where government accepted us as deaf interpreters to be also interpreters. Caroline, and then also what is very important is that that you need to get the backing from the Deaf Federation, that the Deaf Federation supports you, and that you can then they can explain their needs for deaf interpreters, hearing interpreters, and then the necessary research articles need to be given to government, and then that will support your argument then.
Okay, thank you so much for your answers. The next question quickly is from South Africa. We'll wait for the international sign interpreter. We have the international sign interpreter ready. Technical, do we have the international sign interpreter? Okay, great. Yes, so the next question is from South Africa, and it says, from South Africa, well done to this presentation and so interesting. That too Okay, I think he's trying to say you are doing a great job on working with deaf interpreters during COVID-19. Have you ever had complaint from deaf, who is your client, about your quality of service because of different dialects of Flemish Sign Language, Dutch Sign Language, vocabulary using national television? And how do you solve this kind of challenges to make sure that you improve? Kindly share with us. So in short, since Germany has got 2 or 3 different sign languages, and if the interpretation or the press conference is on national television, meaning the entire country is watching the presentation, so how do you deal with the different sign languages in different regions when you're interpreting on national television? I think that's what he's trying to ask. Also, he's asking if you could collaborate with the South Africa to also have deaf interpreter practice there introduced or improved. So how do you handle the assignment when you're on national television in terms of switching between one sign language to another sign language? And what's the feedback from the deaf clients?
Television interpreters, there's different settings. Maybe there's spoken languages or Dutch interpreter, French interpreter, people from Belgium. They know the languages and they accept it because Belgium have a language, German languages, and there's different language and the same, and it's the same with sign language. So then there are some complaints that maybe say that we use British Sign Language, but the deaf people are patient because we can't incorporate all the other cultures because in Switzerland it's exactly the same because they have French, German, Italian. So, but it's bad. They need to respect us because we're not bad interpreters. So that's what I'm thinking if I'm answering your question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wait for the, yeah, okay. Thank you. And then it's a comment from Kenya. It says, sorry, just a moment. Okay, Kenya says a good presentation. In Kenya, we've not practiced deaf interpretation. It's an eye opener. That was Mini. And then the next question, it was repeated from South Africa, so we skip it. Next question again, it was a repetition from Jabba. And then Ricardo Walker says, I asked deaf interpreter. That's a question. So I think maybe he's wondering, maybe it's the first time to hear of having a deaf interpreter. So maybe we'll marry to the next question. Let's see if we can find another question. And then you can also respond, what sense is there in having a deaf interpreter? So let's look for the next question and then you can combine the answer. So Monica Rodriguez says, thanks for the wonderful presentation and good luck in this inspiring collaboration. Another one says, good question. Okay. Well done, Carolien. Great to see your work here. Okay, I think Jabba says, hi, I think you misread my question. Need to be clear more next time. Okay, so next time. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I misread your question, but thanks for understanding that you don't have enough time. Okay, so the rest are just accolades. Okay, I need to wind up. This one I'm seeing your message is a bit, sorry. Okay, thank you so much, colleagues. We'll now move to the next session. I think I will hand over to the next moderator or technical can take it up. Thank you so much for your presentation again, Belgium.